Surrounded by the narrow, shivering summer and sunset seas, the continent of Westeros was originally populated by giants and children of the forest during the Dawn Age, before the migration of First Men through the Arm of Dorne in the south. After a lengthy war that saw this land bridge sink into the ocean, a peace pact gave way to the legendary Age of Heroes, where men spread throughout the continent, while giants retreated into the far north and the children into the deep forests. Adopting the old gods of the children, the First Men prospered for millennia, even defeating a horrifying invasion by White Walkers during the Long Night around 8,000 years before conquest. Yet in time, the First Men too were supplanted by foreign invaders, conquered by the fair-haired seven-worshipping Andals from the Axe in Essos, who migrated west to escape the expanding power of Old Valyria and their dragon lords. After some time living in Andalos, the Andals led a religious crusade against Westeros, conquering every kingdom of the continent save for the large and powerful north, where House Stark ruled over the last realm of the First Men. Although the Andals reigned over the south, in many cases they intermarried with and adopted the traditions of the defeated, most notably in the Iron Islands, where many abandoned the Seven to worship the drowned god of the local population. Around 700 years before conquest, the last major migration into Westeros occurred when Princess Nymeria led what remained of a 10,000-ship Rhoynar refugee fleet to escape the Dragon Lords of Valyria, who conquered their city-states along the Rhoyne River in Essos. After failing to settle Sothoryos, Naath, and the Summer Isles, Nymeria arrived in Dorne and married the Andal leader of House Martell, creating an alliance that conquered the territory, finally creating a new homeland for her people. Intermixing with the local population, Westeros was then unknown as a land of Andals, Rhoynar, and First Men. Carving up the continent into 7 kingdoms south of the ice wall marking their northern border, Westeros became a target for yet another invasion in 2 BC, when the Dragon Lord Aegon the Conqueror of House Targaryen, patriarch to the last of the 40 great Valyrian families, led his army west from his home of Dragonstone to establish the Aegon Fort, which later became the capital of King's Landing. Conquering 6 of 7 kingdoms, Dorne was eventually brought into the realm through a marriage alliance in 187 AC. Though the Targaryens seemed invincible, the Dance of the Dragon's civil war and aftermath led to a significant loss in power and influence due to the death of their dragons and dragon riders, allowing Lord Robert Baratheon to overthrow Mad King Aerys II in 283 AC, ending the First Targaryen dynasty. Although the history of Westeros was no doubt fascinating to the scholarly maesters of the Citadel, it was only one continent in a great wide world, with many other lands and peoples to explore. Yet as difficult as it was to write the history of their own lands, relying on legends, rumors, physical evidence, and whatever written records survived the long years, it was even more difficult to discern truth from fiction when relying on second-hand accounts of other lands from sometimes dubious sources, with few opportunities for first-hand knowledge or travel to these regions. As a result, information about the outside world was increasingly unreliable the further one ventured from Westeros, becoming a mix of myth, legend, and reality. Moving south, there were the Summer Isles, surrounded by the Summer Sea, a largely peaceful, friendly, trade-oriented region populated by a seafaring, ebony-skinned people. Consisting of 3 relatively large territories surrounded by smaller islands, the cultural center of these lands was Tall Trees Town, where priestesses carved their history onto enormous talking trees. Unintelligent, relatively enlightened polytheistic people who spoke the Summer tongue. Their most revered deities governed love, beauty, and fertility, believing intimacy a holy virtue and prostitution a noble profession practiced by nobles and commoners alike. Preferring trade to battle, the islands never attempted to invade another land, but were nonetheless subject to many raids from slavers and pirates throughout the years. While unification did occur, they were traditionally governed as independent islands, with disputes settled through ritualistic warfare, where teams of warriors battled on consecrated grounds with spears and slings. Resembling a Westerosi tourney more than a battle, the winners took the disputed prize, while the losers were exiled. As a result, island warfare did not harm civilians or property. Some notable information: throughout their early history, they thought they were alone in a world of ocean. The islands produced some of the best archers and bows in the world. They produced famed swan ships. They may have explored southern Sothoryos but kept the information and maps to themselves. The Isle of Women was populated by Rhoynar refugees. Robert Baratheon considered invading the islands on behalf of Jalabar Zo, the exiled prince of the Red Flower Vale who was living in his court. Moving east across the Summer Sea was the Island of Naath, or Isle of Butterflies, populated by a beautiful, gentle, dark-skinned people with golden eyes, committed to pacifism even in self-defense, or for sustenance, eating fruit rather than flesh, and making music rather than war. a monotheistic people who worshipped the Lord of Harmony. They believed the many butterflies on the island were messengers of their deity, charged with their protection. And indeed, it was the illness butterfly fever that prevented any outside power from conquering the island. Due to their reputation for non-violence, the Naathi were often targeted by slavers. However, any outsider who spent more than a few days on the island contracted the fatal butterfly fever, forcing them to leave or die. Yet even so, coastal raids were still possible, forcing the Naathi to migrate further inland. East of Naath and northwest of Sothoryos were the infamous Basilisk Isles, named for the beasts that once roamed these lands. A hot, humid region plagued by stinging flies, sand fleas, and bloodworms. Life on the Isles was nasty, brutal, and short, yet ruins on several of the islands and the native people on the Isle of Toads suggested an ancient civilization may have ruled over these lands in the distant past. In more modern times, the old Empire of Gis founded the colony Gorgai on the Isles, which was later conquered by the Valyrians and turned into the penal colony Gogosos. Though Gogosos thrived as a slave port for a time after the doom of Valyria, the outbreak of the Red Death Plague wiped out 9/10 of the population, leaving it to become a lawless backwater, home to murderers, exiles, pirates, and sellswords. The worst of humanity gathered seeking others of their kind. Bordered by the Summer and Jade Seas, stories name Sothoryos a land of vicious wildlife, savage natives, and deadly diseases, with only its northern coast properly mapped. A vast land of bountiful resources, Sothoryos was populated by the Sothori or brindled men, a large, relatively primitive, well-muscled people with thick dark skin brindled in white patterns, considered intellectually inferior by some, but valued as slave pit fighters due to their strength and skill as warriors. Yet while natives of the north were often raided and enslaved, traveling further south or inland meant encountering populations far more fearsome and territorial, which were believed to practice cannibalism and horrific religious rituals in worship of dark gods. Yet the native Sothori represented only a minor danger when compared to the far deadlier threat of vicious wildlife and deadly disease, with Archmaester Ebooks claiming 9 of every 10 Westerosi travelers to Sothoryos would contract an illness, and of those half would die. Similar to the Basilisk Isles, ruins like the mysterious abandoned city of Yin, constructed from oily black stone, suggested an ancient civilization once populated the region. Though the Giscari Empire established the walled city of Zamitar at the mouth of the Zamios River and the penal colony of Gorosh at Wyvern Point, these colonies were eventually conquered by the Dragon Lords of Old Valyria. Yet as the years went on and harsh conditions kept migration sparse, these colonies were slowly abandoned to piracy and ruin. Some notable information. During the Age of Valyria, the dragon rider Genera Baleris flew her dragon Terax as far south as possible, hoping to find the southernmost edge of Sothoryos, but after 3 years returned home, claiming to have only found jungle, deserts, and mountains, calling it a land without end. For a time, Princess Nymeria and her Rhoynar refugees settled the region, yet over the course of their first year, suffered so many raids and plagues they had to depart. The final calamity occurred when a ship discovered the entire population settled in Yin vanished overnight. At the height of their power, Gogosos was considered the 10th free city. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Renee the Demigod, Tio the Iron Banker, Galvaelra 8 Hands, and Fred Heartless, Knight of Iron and Ice. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and click on the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.